the Australian government has revoked the visa for Novak Djokovic just 3 days before the start of the Australian Open. Djokovic is the #1 seed in the tournament. He is also unvaccinated, and Australia is struggling with rising case numbers and has been investigating a series of errors and discrepancies in the tennis star's COVID testing and travel documents.
Djokovic now faces deportation. If he is ordered to leave, he will be unable to defend his Australian Open title and unable to break the Grand Slam record he covets, at least for now. Djokovic is appealing the ruling. Australian Immigration Minister Alex Hawke released a statement that says his decision was made in the public interest. So let's go live to Melbourne, bring in Paula Hancock. Paula, this is complicated. Just 3 days before the tournament starts, where do things stand this morning?
Well, John, it gets even more complicated. There is currently a hearing ongoing on this, just 3 hours after the Immigration Minister Alex Hawke made that decision. We are back in court and hearing this decisions hearing. Now, what we know at this point is that Djokovic will not be detained or deported tonight. It's currently 11 p.m. Melbourne time. We know that he will be going to an interview with immigration officials 8 a.m. Tomorrow morning local time. That's Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern. And from that point on, he will be considered detained. There will be Australia Border Force officials, 2 officials accompanying him. So he will have that interview with immigration officials. Then a couple of hours later, he will be allowed to go to his lawyer's office to determine the next steps. But of course, that again will be while he is detained. He will be accompanied by those officials. And then after that, he will, we understand, be in detention. Now, this is going to a higher court. Judge Anthony Kelly, who presided and reinstated the visa back on Monday, has said this will go to the Federal Court of Australia now. And we've heard from Djokovic's lawyers in the past hour or so pointing out that the immigration minister's argument is that Djokovic staying here would, quote, excite anti-vax sentiment in the community. Now, Djokovic's lawyers, unsurprisingly, say that that is patently irrational and a radically new approach. So that is what we understand they will be fighting against at this point. Now, Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, has said that this does prove and backs up the fact that Australians have to follow these rules very closely, and this backs that up, his decision by the Immigration Minister, saying that it does justify the sacrifices that Australians have made. But clearly it shows that this Friday night Djokovic is going to fight this as long as he can. His lawyers even pointing out that they would like this to go to the higher court on Sunday, so potentially he could play in the Australian Open Monday. John?
Time is running out. Paula Hancock, thank you very much. Joining me now, Renee Stubbs, ESPN tennis analyst and former world #1 in doubles. She joins us from Melbourne. Renee, if you will humor me for a second, I want to interview you almost as if you're 2 people, an Australian and then a tennis star. First, your reaction to this just as an Australian.
Well, I mean, that's a big issue here, isn't it? Because Australia really has such a tough lockdown, particularly here in Melbourne. So a lot of Victorians are pretty upset that he was even allowed into the country. A lot of Australians haven't been able to go over state borders to go and visit family members if unvaccinated. A lot of borders have been shut down for well over a year. So it's been a really difficult time for Australians down here. So on that respect, you can understand the agitation and the anger towards allowing any unvaccinated person into the country. Now, as a former tennis player, I understand also the rigors and the problems of traveling around the world and all the issues that they're going to face. And Novak's going to continue to face this issue really throughout the world. But in Australia in particular, this country is really, really tough on anyone coming into the country at all.
I just want to remind people that Djokovic himself admitted this week that he broke COVID protocols. And after he tested positive, after he knowingly tested positive, he sat down for an interview with journalists with COVID. He also admitted that his travel documents were wrong, that there were lies on his travel documents to enter Australia. So people need to know that is part of the situation. So, Renee, this is 3 days before the beginning of the Open. What are you hearing from the players there about the turmoil that this is causing?
Well, I mean, quite frankly, most of the players are pretty much over it. I think a lot of people are over it, including Novak, I would suspect as well. I know that Craig Tiley at Tennis Australia, but mainly the tennis players, really, they're on, tennis players are pretty selfish in their own right. So they've been in their own little bubble. I mean, I'll be really honest, I was one prior, so I know. So they're really thinking about their own draw and how they're playing and what's going on. They're not really concerned because Novak really doesn't sort of mean anything to them, except obviously if he's one of your opponents. So they're really sticking to their own matches and practices and worrying about themselves. So, but I'm sure that they'll be very happy when this is over and done with at some point.
I see no reason or avenue for this ruling to be overturned by the Australian minister. Maybe it will be, but right now I don't think there's any dispute he had the authority to revoke the visa. But if somehow Djokovic does end up playing, what do you think the reaction will be when he takes the court?
I think it'll be a little bit mixed. There's a lot of Serbian, expats that live here in Australia, particularly in Melbourne, so he gets a rousing response from them. I think the majority of the actual Australian public probably won't be necessarily on his side, and he will get a little bit of, I'd say some boost will come his way because it's been so stressful for Australians in general here with COVID. But I don't think Novak's going to have a lot of overtly, aggressive fans on his side if he does play on Monday night.
No, and of course, if he doesn't, it means the #1 seeded player disappears before even playing the first match, which is something the tournament will have to grapple with. Renee Stubbs, thank you so much for being with us.